Welcome to part 3, finale in a 3-part series on how to go from being a good designer to a great designer. And this last one, you're going to want to grab a cup of coffee, strap in your seatbelt, because it's going to be a ride. We're going down deep into conceptual thinking and design, otherwise known as semiotics. So when you put things together, it forces a relationship. When you put an image of a tomato over a person's face, it's not just a tomato, it's not just a person's face, but it's saying something. It's probably critique on the person. Maybe they're a clown. Maybe they need to be removed from office or something like that. So we enter now into the third thing, which is conceptual design. Conceptual design is something that's used a lot, but often misunderstood. So let's get into what my definition, my interpretation of conceptual design is. Now here's the telltale sign that it's not conceptual design, because you said it was a conceptual design. My concept is to use a face and a banana. I'm yeah, that don't mean jack to me. And students are notorious for using those words and say, that's a really strong concept. No, it's not. So we get into some $6 words here, okay? Like semiotics. When you put things together, they have a hybrid third meaning. And if you're able to create a hybrid third meaning, like this and this equals that, then you've done something that is written about extensively in the book, A Smile in the Mind. This is a book for wit and humor within design. So the way it's explained in the book, and it's an excellent book if you get your hands on it. I think they now revived the printing again, so it's not going to cost you $600 to buy the book. When you create a conceptual piece that's witty, it's like a joke or a puzzle that the audience gets to figure out. If you make the puzzle or the joke too complicated, it's frustrating. You're like, oh, I don't get it. You make it too easy, that required no mental effort at all. So there's a sweet spot, and there's not like a scientific formula where you break out the ruler and you measure, but there's a sweet spot that when you discover it, you smile in the mind. So let me give you a classic example. Many people in the design space already know this. Many people outside have never seen this. But if you've seen the FedEx logo designed by Landor Associates, okay, the FedEx is set in Futur bold. Somewhere in there between the E and the X, carefully designed and manipulated, is a tiny negative space arrow.
Yes.
Because FedEx gets your package absolutely overnight. And so when Landor and Associates redesigned the old FedEx logo to this, people are like, duh! And when you get it,
it's so true. True.
Right? They probably explored 100 different configurations till they came up on this. And I'm almost certain, I just imagine being in the room where it happened, where the creative director's like, that's it. All the other stuff, it don't matter. This is what we're going to sell them on because this is genius. It's going to last 10, 20, 100 years into the future. No one's going to sit there and say, well, that looks really dated, because they use a beautiful timeless typeface like Futura. They find a simple expression that's not too gimmicky. It's not overly labored on. And that's the puzzle that we're talking about. When my son was driving the car and he saw the FedEx truck drive by, and he's staring at that. He's like, Dad, is that a white arrow in there? I'm like, yes, it is. And his face lit up. And even children can understand that. Okay? So this is what is referred to as conceptual design. So if you're able to have a twist or a puzzle or something, a hook for people to solve, it's a brilliant thing. Let me give you some other examples of this, okay? Now, Chris Nolan's new film, Oppenheimer's out. It's the buzz. It's considered a masterpiece. Many people are calling it the best film in Nolan's career, the most important film in this decade. I mean, it is a great film. I'm not sure if I want to put all that on it, right? But it reminded me of a movie trailer and also a poster for Batman. I think it's The Dark Knight Rises, right? And there's a bunch of scenes and the world's falling apart. There's only one person who can save us as Batman, right? And the city is crumbling. And the shot is the camera looking upward and the city is falling apart. But in the negative space in between the buildings, it's a symbol of the bat. Now, not everyone sees it, but if you're paying attention, you're like, it's the Batman symbol. So in one moment, they're able to create an image that has two reads. It has a multiple read. It looks like buildings falling apart, like the end of times. And also in the negative space is the Batman symbol, the thing that he wears on his chest. Really conceptual design. So there are countless examples of this, especially if you start to dig into this. The masters of this are people who work in advertising, because they don't just create images, they create meaning. There's many expressions of this. You can do this with words and switching orders of words, or just taking a common phrase and having fun with it. I remember many years ago, this was like over 20 years ago, there was a brand, it was called Doc Martens, and Doc Martens was like famous or popular within a certain community, punks and kind of anti-establishment people, right? And so they knew their audience. These are workwear boots, really, and they found an audience in this alternative culture, probably made popular also by the grunge movement in music, right? And so I remember seeing this ad, and it said, the mainstream is polluted. This is just copy. It's brilliant copy. The mainstream is polluted. And there was this image of like a gas mask, and it was just dirty, and it was like in the sewer, and it was just like, maybe it is, right?
That's good.
So you can just do this with words, Mo. If you're a really good copywriter, and some of the best examples of really copywriting that's been done so consistently is for The Economist magazine. They're so brilliant, and they're known because it's British. It's a magazine that is designed for world leaders, for CEO, for C-suite executives. So they know who their audience is, and so they speak up to them, they don't speak down to them. So some of the copywriting. Now, The Economist has a very simple, bold red image, like it's all red, and it's usually a serif typeface, or something like Bauer, Bodoni, something like that. Very simple. And one of the lines was, lose the ability to slip out of a meeting unnoticed. The Economist magazine. Here's another one. The pregnant pause. Don't be the father. It's full of gems. I mean, you could just study what The Economist does in terms of writing. This one was brilliant. This is not a political statement, and this is pre this person gaining the kind of national attention that he's received. Back in the 80s, Donald Trump was known as the person with the golden touch, the Midas touch, right? And so if you're reading a magazine for leaders, what are you going to do with the copy? You're going to say Trump, Donald. They just inverted that. So if you want to beat Donald Trump, this is the magazine for you.
Oh yeah, they're good. You're going to make me go buy copies.
Well, you just go search online. The Economist magazine copywriting, and you're going to see amazing copy in terms of how it's written. So we can do this with words, we can do this images, we can do this with images and words. There's a lot of different ways. And now I'll take you into what I guess it's called like ambient media, where we take the concept into three-dimensional thinking, okay? There's a couple different expressions of this. Here's a campaign for responsible drinking, right? Like don't drink and drive, where they have a toilet and then they have two other toilets printed right next to it. And you're like, if you can't tell which is real and which is not, you've had enough to drink. What a brilliant way to use existing environmental things to do something really cool with. Another ad that I thought was brilliant was, I think, an ad for an exercise program, a gym, or maybe it was for Nike or something. And it showed, back in the day, this dating myself, we used to look at this thing called the TV guide. And the TV guide was to show you programs. This predates TiVo or
I remember
DVR.
the TV guide.
Right, you remember. So you have times and channels and programming. Then you would get the paper just to get the guide, so you would miss an essential piece of television programming. So it would show you the TV guide, and then it would strip out a small piece, either vertically or horizontally, and it would show a person like going up 100 flights of stairs. So instead of you sitting there being a couch potato, it's like peering into something. Here's one that requires interaction from you as a person to get the concept. So it's a magazine spread, and it's a woman in a exercise outfit, and she's doing crunches. So right in the gutter is her midsection. So when you lifted the page, it looked like she was doing a crunch. So that was a brilliant interactive ad, old school, for you to like, hey, maybe you need to hit the gym instead of hitting the salad bar or whatever it is you're hitting. Don't hit the buffet, hit the gym.
I think the designers that are watching this are like, oh my God, this is brilliant. Theoretically, they probably understand it. What are some practices that someone can do to, I guess, develop this skill to get to that end result? I really believe that this last one is really what takes you from like, there's like good, great, and then this I feel like is God tier. If anybody watches Dragon Ball Z and then like the final evolution of them in Super Saiyan, off the top of your head, maybe some daily practices as they're doing their writing or they're doing their design or anything that comes to mind that can get them to develop the skill to get to this end result.
Well, you can understand that this is not one where you say tomorrow I'm going to be a great conceptual designer thinker.
Right.
This takes time to develop. So the first thing we need to be aware is just awareness itself. Like, are you looking at your design? Are you saying, I aspire to be a conceptual designer and thinker? And then you look at your work like, does any of my work do this? If that's not, at least you're in the right place, because now you can recognize it, and just knowing what it is versus not knowing what it is. Like you've been head in the sand, so to speak, and you don't know what conceptual design is. You talk about your work like it's like heavily conceptual, but it's really not. Nobody taught me this. When I learned, I'm like, oh, that's what that is. Okay. People give you clues, they give you examples, but me being a super analytical person, I start to break down what are the formulas, what are the patterns I see? Are there only so many ways of doing this, right? In fact, like 7 or 8 formulas that you use. And so that would be the next level. If you start to study enough of this, then you'll see patterns emerge, and then you can organize different types of conceptual thinking into groups. This is how I'm able to recall these things and how I'm able to teach this. So in a different life before you met me, Mo, this is what I taught my students how to do. And I taught them how to do this, not in a static image, but over time, as a sequence, because as a motion designer, this is what you're supposed to do. I'll give you an example of that in a second. So some resources that we can dig into. There's a book. I already mentioned it. If you're all paying attention, let's pause the video and go ahead and type it in right now. What is the book that I recommend that you read? Okay, I hope you said A Smile in the Mind. There's another book that you can read. It's called the Ad Concept Book. And there are books on amazing award-winning copywriting. It's just words. And just look at how this is done. There's a magazine. I'm going to butcher the pronunciation of it, but it's Luze Archive. And that is an international magazine that features the best in advertising. It's the only magazine I've consistently subscribed to in the last 20 years. As soon as I can afford it, because it was kind of expensive, I've been subscribing to it, even though print is dead. I still love looking at these things and breaking them down and saying, okay, what is the thinking here? To reverse engineer, why is this working? If you read the book A Smile in the Mind, it will tell you a couple of things, and I think it's important to take a minute to explain this, okay? When you create a conceptual ad, you're asking participation from the reader, from the audience, and they need to use some intellectual bandwidth to solve it. And when they do, depending on how smart they are, how much context they have, and a lot of these ads are culturally relevant to a specific audience. Not all audiences can understand the ads, right? Once you get it, you feel smarter. You feel like you're in on the joke, and you feel like connected to this thing. This is why you'll see on social media, they have simple math problems. They say only top 3% of the genius population can solve this thing. I just did in my head, it's 14. What are you talking about? That's why these puzzles, these visual puzzles, these problems to solve are so fun for us. We feel smarter. We feel like we're part of an exclusive club. And that's what I think you want to explore if you want to be better at this stuff.
I gotta ask, is this, I know we're talking about design, but is this the inception of the meme? Is this kind of like the foundation for how memes got created, where you have a title and then you have an image and then connected together, you're like, oh, that's funny.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
This is the, okay, just making sure that
yeah, that's
that
semiotics, right?
Yeah.
If you strip away the image, the meaning is lost. If you pull away the words, the meaning is lost.
100%.
So how memes typically work is they take an image we've seen 1,000 times and they change the meaning of the image by adding a certain phrase, and you're like, that's it.
100%.
Right?
100%.
Me on Monday, you know, those frameworks, right?
Right. So it gives the image even more power, and then it evokes that reaction in you
Yeah.
from the meaning that you decipher.
Yeah. And
That's amazing.
The greater the hook, the bigger the emotional expression, like that. First of all, it's a piece of truth, and it's really unexpected in its expression of like a fat cat, or, you know, whatever it is, like a bloated cat that can't even walk. You know, that's me also. That is what they're doing, right? So before I forget, let me tell you how you do this on a sequential way, like over time. We've been talking mostly about static. We talked about some interactive conceptual thinking and design. How do you do this over time? This is the art and design of title sequences. They have to figure out how they can surprise you. What is the hook? What is the big idea there, okay? And what you're trying to do is you're trying to find a moment in time. This is just one formula, there's many. Moment in time where there's some ambiguity as to what it is, where in the moment prior to it, it feels like it's one thing, and the moment after, when it's revealed, it's something totally different. That perfect merger where it exists in two spaces and has two meaning is the hard part. I'll give you an example. I was working on a title sequence for a friend of mine. His name is Terry Rieta. He's making a short film about how this guy was kind of being stepped on all his life, like this doormat. And he got fed up because he has this tyrant bully for a neighbor, right? So he set him up by doing a crank call, and that's the name of the film, Crank Calls. So he crank calls him and he sets him up to fight with someone else, and their whole lives get disrupted, and he's just watching the whole thing. And then it occurred to me what the visual metaphor is. Okay, so he's using a phone to exact his vengeance on his crazy a-hole neighbor. I asked my buddy to go shoot a bunch of photos of an old rotary phone. You guys remember what that looks like? There's like a little dial, it's circular, and there's cutouts. So you put your finger in the number that you want to dial, and it hits a little stop, and then you go again. So the entire film is like a starring of film production by, directed by, written by, and you see in the background this phone, this old rotary dial spinning, right? And it would just spin. So we get it. There's music. It's building up some tension, and there's this one moment when it locks into place and it spins back, and it's the chamber of like a pistol, and there's one bullet in it.
Oh, that's
so
hard.
You see what I'm saying? So in that moment, when it spins and it comes back, it's no longer 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It's empty, and then there's a bullet and it ends. So now we, as the audience member, was like, something dark and sinister is happening. There's a phone, but it's not a phone. Somebody's going to get killed. There's this undercurrent of impending violence. And that was the perfect expression. So when we did the storyboard, that's what I said to Terry, and I pitched it to him. I said, here's the idea. It's this, it uses the phone as a weapon, undercurrent of violence, and it's just the right metaphor. And he goes, that's it, Chris. So we did it. One of my just amazing 3D artists, his name is Lawrence. He built this thing in 3D, animated, and it won a bunch of awards. It won what I've not been able to win again, the Art Directors Club pencil. Or no, it's a British D&AD, British Design and Art Direction, yes. So, because they can recognize there's a concept there, we submitted for it and we won.
You are brilliant. Thank you for having this conversation with me. Thank you for pouring in these principles and these examples and the breakdown. I think if I was a designer and I was on the path of really cementing this as a career, I believe that these 3 principles are like, I would have to watch this over and over again. This was supposed to be one video of 3 principles, but what we're going to do is we're going to turn this into a series because of how deep dive each section is. So just a very short recap in case you missed it and you were like, all the juice has been flowing. The first lesson is being a good and thoughtful and patient listener that also asks good questions to understand the overarching goal of what it is you're going to be creating. And you can watch that video for all the positive implications that come from being able to do that effectively. The second one is understanding and then leveraging typography to organize the creative to be able to send the message the right way relative to what it is you're designing for, right? Whether that's, as Chris said, static, motion, whatever the application might be. And the last one, which we did a huge deep dive on, and if you haven't been listing the resources, you 100% should. And I hope I'm saying this right. Semiotics, right, Chris? Semiotics, which is making the design have meaning when the audience interacts with it. Simplest way I understood it as a simpleton when it comes to design is a meme. The text by itself doesn't make sense. The image by itself doesn't make sense, but together they do. I really, really hope you enjoyed this series of us just jamming about what it takes for you as a designer to go from good, or maybe not that good, to great, and then from great to just God tier, because Chris just dropped a bunch of gems. Chris, I want to leave the last kind of word for you that you want to ask the audience anything or any type of final words around all of this.
I don't get many opportunities, Mo, to speak about and to nerd out about design and its intricacies. Oftentimes people see me on YouTube like, who's this wanker? Who's this, 30-something kid who's talking about principles that he has no understanding of? Or who's this person who's perpetuating this idea of designers and creatives overpricing themselves? So I'm appreciative of the opportunity and the conversation that we had today, Mo. And if you are a fan of what I'm talking about, if it's turned on a light bulb in your head, let us know in the comments, because this will encourage us to make more content like this. What many of you don't know is I taught at a private art school for over 15 years. These are concepts I've broken down time and time again. So I'm happy to share about these things, and we can create content specifically to help you come up with these conceptual hooks, because if you can do this, you've already solved 1/3 of this puzzle in terms of how to become a great designer.